Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here. And before we get into the Russian-Kazakhstan joint U.S. space launch that nobody seems to be talking about, nobody wants to acknowledge, but really gets into this aspect that obviously there are treaties in space that we are unaware of, and the United States, Russia, and China are clearly a part of them as they are part of the ISS project. At the same time, you have SpaceX launching their Starlink system, their ride-along program with DARPA's Starlink Blackjack. You also have Black Sky satellites that are another element of this military-industrial complex. You have this all being Lockheed Martin driven. And last night, several of the people I've done broadcasts with in the past and who I have high respect for, Jamie Deluxe, who's done great work over the years, and my boy, quite frankly, that I've been going on recently, both of them caught the SpaceX rocket in the sky. And it actually made kind of national news. The funny thing is that they live quite a ways away from one another. One is out in South Carolina, Myrtle Beach style, and the other one is out in New York, and it was spotted all over. So we're going to get into those two stories to boot in the very beginning. But before we get there, and before we actually sit here and watch a 20-plus minute speech from the other side, because I watched it last night, I thought it was very powerful. I want to make sure that people understand I'm not for Putski and Hutch, all right? This isn't about Russia, 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 Russia. But this is an example of how we never hear the perspective of the other side in this country, even when it is by the very mechanisms that are being pushed upon the public as authoritative sources, aka the UN. All right, so that's going to be the bulk of the broadcast. But before we get into any of that either, let's do a little bit of housekeeping here. And I've got a great announcement after that. I'm pretty excited. I hope everybody else gets excited. Get excited. But I did a lot of shows recently, and obviously I get a lot of emails and DMs. I can't read them all. I do breeze through a lot of them, and some of the stuff absolutely ends up on this show. In fact, the Russian foreign minister that we're going to play, right, the foreign affairs minister, that was sent to me by the Bermas Brigade, I think, in a mention last night, and I happened to click on it and watch it because I thought it was compelling. We don't do the prediction game here when it comes to dates that are going viral, and everybody think it's a day you will remember. It will live in infamy. You will know where you were on this day. 12 days of darkness. We'll know this and that, okay? No thanks. Bunch of Johnny nonsense stuff we don't buy into here. Okay, it's fine to make predictions, especially when you're talking in the coming weeks and months. I mean, obviously there was a lot of speculation on what would happen with Ukraine and Russia said they weren't going to invade, and they got pushed to the brink, and they absolutely did invade. Okay, and they were ramping up via military war games. Period. And it looks like our intelligence apparatus knew that they would push them enough that this would happen, period. They were announcing it, right? It's tough because how do you trust well-known liars when you're talking about the Defense Department, period? Just putting that out there. But we don't play that, Jason, what's going to happen on September 24th? Nothing. I told you September 25th will be the next day. That's what will happen. And here we are. We're at September 25th, and there is no magic date, and there is no day of infamy, and those things just, they're not worth focusing on. Now, you want to know what's worth focusing on. This is a clip of Jeremy Siegel on CNBC this week talking about the markets and basically telling you the economy is done. They're not playing. And he's saying, you know, he gives them the excuse of they're stupid, they don't know what they're doing, etc. But you watch this old guy fired up. This is what we should be concentrated on. That this guy's telling you that the economy is about to implode sauce. So Jeremy Siegel, CNBC, it's hilarious. You know, this is one of those cases where you got one of those really straight-laced news people, right? Like just totally down the line, no personality of their own. And you see the look on his face. You seem rather worked up. Yeah, he seems pretty worked up.
Money supply data, which is going to show the greatest decline in 5 months that we've had in the post-war period. I mean, if he looks at any of the monetary or financial indicators, he can't say, oh, we have to keep them on. I mean, at his press conference, he said, we have to get real rates into positive territory. They're in positive territory for every maturity. For the first time in years, we're already there. I mean, I thought that was the most uninformative. And no one was asking him a hard question. How do we have 3.2 million new workers and GDP going down? What does that mean? What does the record decline in the money supply mean? I mean, what does the collapse in commodity prices mean? What is the lag construction of these housing indicators that are 40% of the core inflation, which are going to filter through inflation for the next 12 to 15 months? Is that what he's looking at? Why is he looking at that? That's not an accurate view of what housing inflation is. I mean, there were no hard questions.
I'm going to stop it here. We're going to let him go because he's obviously telling you. So this was the Fed coming out and saying what they're going to do. And he's like, what is going on? They're not being challenged on anything. Everybody's just like, durr, durr, durr.
There were 50 reporters there. I don't know. They basically said, repeat the statement you made at the beginning. There's so many things I ask him. What is he actually looking at? I mean, he's looking at 3-month annualized core inflation that is a lag. Well, we all look at market. I mean, look at what does the stock market do? It looks at market-oriented data. And that's what Professor, the Fed should be looking at.
I don't know that I've seen you this animated. You seem downright angry.
I am very upset. Yes, I am. I'm afraid it's like a pendulum. They were way too easy, as I've told you and many others through 2020, 2021. And now, oh my God, we're going to be real tough guys until we crush the economy. I mean, that is just, to me, absolutely poor monetary policy would be an understatement.
Poor monetary policy would be an understatement. This guy's a gentleman. He's telling you they're coming in to crush the economy gleefully, unchallenged by the mainstream mockingbird media. And if you don't think this is part of the agenda for their track, trace, database, digital currency, CBDC blockchain system, obviously you're not paying attention. Obviously you don't get it is part of the agenda. Okay? And it's here. All right. Let's get into the top stories, and then we are going to play again the Russian perspective. Love it or hate it. And again, I don't think that Putin is riding some horse into, against the new world order and globalism. He's the guy that's going to stop the Great Reset. Absolutely not. He's a gangster like all of them. These are gangsters we're dealing with. Just because you think about it. Think about how over the years we have been conditioned, one, to look at gangsters as mostly Italians, and then you could go into the gang lifestyle in urban areas, right? And those type of gangs. That's mostly what the mainstream media has focused on, all right? But you had gangsters and gangs all over the world. You always do, right? You hear a little bit about the Yakuza there, here and there, but really you've had these people all over, and at the highest levels they get into politics, all right? And then they make decisions that aren't, okay, let me just say this, that aren't just killing, one or two people or a family hideously, or even what the cartels do in Mexico, where sometimes they'll take out entire neighborhoods. We're talking, military warfare from drones in the sky that wipe out thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and sometimes millions of people through a war of terror. Not on. Let's not get it twisted. In fact, later today, we might actually show you what they're doing on the Israeli-Palestinian border, where now they have automated death machines. I tweeted it out. I mean, you have to go through this barrier. It's already apartheid city over there, guys. If you don't understand what the real apartheid is, that's happening there. But now you have automated death machines there. Wow. They're not even drones. They're just guns rigged up. Automated death machines. Okay, so that's one. So who are the real gangsters here? You know, is it the guy that you saw in Scarface? That's one of the conditioning. So in other words, they've diverted attention away from the fact that they're the real gangsters at the top levels. Okay, and then two, they've glorified gangster and criminal behavior. Okay, they've made it cool and hip when it's that flavor, and made you believe that like politics is somehow boring. You got a glimpse of the darkness with David Fincher's series House of Cards, but that's just a small glimpse of the darkness. So when you get into black programs and space and all that other stuff that I was talking about before, this is the AP headline. Space station gets 3 new residents after Russian launch. Now, what they never really tell you is that, you know, right now when we're supposed to be at war with Russia, there are obviously deals cut because we're in space with them. And before SpaceX came along to move military cargo, which again, Starlink military cargo, that's what was happening yesterday. You had this program and agreement. This is the American astronaut. That's Frank Rubio. And then Dmitry Peteltin, and it is Sergei Protokopev. I've probably butchered them. They all went up together out of Kazakhstan in a Russian launch. So somehow, some way, when we're at real warfare, and you have the Poot actually talking about nuclear warfare, and you've got their space chief talking about death from above, they're still together. Now, I would argue, I got this nice little book right here, okay? And it is Footprints on the Moon, AP. But in it, you know, you can just go to this section. Let's bring it up so everybody can see it. Right here in the beginning, and there you have all the Russian cosmonauts that were kicking our butt, that were literally beating us in every respect before the Gemini and Apollo missions. There they are. It's in the book. Yeah, even the first woman in space. Talk about progressive, huh? How about that? How about them apples? So, look, to act like space warfare isn't real, most of it's highly classified, we don't have other propulsion systems, it's just ignorant. It's ignorant. And you're not looking at this post-World War II, born classified underground network that is the military-industrial complex that was being discussed and warned about via Eisenhower in that address. So yesterday, a lot of videos of the rocket. See, because you could see these things too. Rocket technology. Let's talk about traditional UFOs, whatever they are. You don't really see them across states like this, like across the coastline. But you see rockets, that's for sure. You see them. So they just launched another 52 Starlinks into orbit. Let's not forget that those are basically Trojan horse civilian systems. We have 12,000 of them being used in the Ukraine right now. Most highest concentrated level out there. And this is my boy, Jamie Deluxe.
A car behind me. We have to go.
And there you go. He's got it on camera.
Did the rocket this one turn into the fire station?
Certainly is a rocket. It's exactly what it is. Smart young lad. Smart young lad. So, let's talk about the announcement. Let's thumbs it up if you are watching on YouTube and all that good stuff. But I got a big announcement. I'm so happy. This is finally coming into fruition. We've talked about for a long time doing a 2-hour-a-day show every day, 4 days a week, okay? Give me the weekend and Friday off because it is a lot. But, you know, also at the same time, do some other work maybe, do some other videos on the fly. We just have the 2-hour-a-day show. It's going to be a morning show It is going to be Red Voice Media exclusive. They pumped my stuff up. They've been really great, and we've worked it out so that the first hour is going to be free across every platform, just like it is now. You see it on Rumble, YouTube, Rockfin. That's where we're going to keep it a little less spicy. We're even going to have a format where the first 30 minutes is going to kind of be a news blitz or whatever subject we're going to be talking about. And then the next 30 to 60 will be an interview. And then we're going to take your calls. Now, the second hour is exclusively going to be at redvoicemedia.com, but you want to go to redvoicemedia.net/Jason, and you can sign up for $1 right now for the premium stuff. We're hoping to launch this in the next 2 to 3 weeks, certainly under a month. It's going to be great. Morning every time. And here's the thing. You're still going to be able to get it for free. We're going to work it out where you get it for free audio style via Podbean. Now, eventually, we're going to give it all away for free, just like we're doing now. So, in other words, we're going to give portions of the video out other than the first hour. That's number one. Number two, after like a 1 to 2 week period, the full thing is going to go free. So anybody can get the full archive anyway. Another great, awesome way to do it. And number four, the Podbean will be going live, so you can always hear the audio, and we're hoping to maybe get this thing going via radio stations. I'm going to try to keep it clean, not Kursky and Hutch all the time. But anyway, we're going to do that, and you can call in at the end of the show via Podbean. So if you get the Podbean app and you're listening to it, you could be watching it premium style as well. But that way you can call in, come over, and join the end part of the show. So really looking forward to launching that. And now, without further ado, we are going to play the Russian side of the story. And I'm going to be jumping in here and there. But really, this is a speech that you won't be hearing about in the mainstream except to demonize the Russians.
Doy ahora la palabra.
Madam President, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting at a difficult, dramatic moment. The crises are growing, and the situation in the area of international security is deteriorating rapidly. Instead of having an honest dialogue and looking for compromises, what we're dealing with is disinformation, course stagings and provocations. The Western line here undermines the trust in international institutions as bodies where interests are agreed. It also undermines trust in international law as a guarantee of fairness and protecting the weak against the strong. The negative tendencies we're witnessing within the UN in a concentrated fashion too. At the UN, which rose from the rubble of German fascism and Japanese militarism and was created to develop friendly relations amongst its members and to prevent conflict among them. The future of the world order is being decided today, and it is clear to any impartial objective. The question is whether or not it is going to be the kind of order with one hegemon at the head of it, making everyone else living, following his notorious rules of benefit to that hegemon only, or are we going to have a democratic, fair world without blackmail and without setting fear into the unwanted, without neo-Nazism and neo-colonialism? We made a firm choice for the latter, and together with partners and like-minded people, calling upon everyone to work for its implementation. What is receding into the past is a unipolar model of world development which served the interests of the 1 golden billion, and its overconsumption level came from the resources of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Today, we're witnessing sovereign states ready to defend their national interests, and this results in the creation of an equal, socially oriented, and sustainable multipolar architecture. But the objective geopolitical processes are being seen by Washington and fully subjugated to it. The elites of Western countries are considered by them as a threat to their dominating position. The United States and allies want to stop the march of history. So at some point in the past, declaring that they were victorious in the Cold War, Washington erected themselves into an almost envoy of God on earth, without any obligations, but only the sacred right to act with impunity wherever they want. And this can be done anywhere against any state, especially if they're somehow displeased, the self-proclaimed masters of the world. We do recall the wars of aggressions very far from American shores in Yugoslavia, in Iraq, and Libya, which claimed many hundred thousands of peaceful lives.
So let me just stop it there. It's hard to disagree with anything he just said there. I mean, first of all, after the Cold War, and many of us bought into this propaganda. I was raised on it. We're number one. We beat the Russians. You know, again, I was still doing duck and cover drills as a kid. And then what came out of that is any nation state that didn't go along with the program that was deemed an enemy, now the morality of the world, the United States just got to do whatever it wanted. And the way that the United Nations came into play was supposed to be, but it was never this. It's always been a vehicle of globalism and global governance, right? And listen to some of the other world leaders as they speak, and they just openly tell you that's the agenda. I listened to India's representative as well last night, all about global governance, all about climate change, right? All about the sustainability project of your standard of living plummeting under authoritarianism. That's where it goes at the end of the day, right? So again, I don't know that I can disagree with anything said here.
Were the truly legitimate interests of the West were impacted in any one of those countries? Was English banned or any other language of NATO countries banned there? Mass media, culture? Were the Anglo-Saxons declared to be subhuman, or heavy weaponry was used against them? So what is the outcome of the adventurism of the United States in the Middle East? Has a human rights situation improved? Is the rule of law better? The socioeconomic situation may perhaps stabilized, or people's livelihood is better? Name a country where Washington interfered by force and where, as a result of that, life improved. Trying to
I mean, is he wrong there? Am I missing something?
restore a one-polar model under the slogan of a rules-based order, West is introducing dividing lines everywhere along the lines of a confrontation between blocs. You are either with us or against us. There is no third option possible. There are no compromises. Continuing with the course to spread NATO to the east and bringing the military infrastructure of NATO to the borders of Russia, the United States now have the goal of subjugating the Asian areas. At the June summit of NATO in Madrid, this self-proclaimed defensive alliance declared the indivisible security of Euro-Atlantic and India and Pacific. And under the slogan of India-Pacific strategies, closed formats are being created, and they undermine what has been built under the ASEAN for decades, namely an open and inclusive regional architecture. And in addition to that, they're playing with fire around Taiwan. On top of that, they're promising military support to Taiwan. Clearly, the notorious Monroe Doctrine is becoming global in scope. Washington is trying to turn the entire world into its own backyard. And the way of doing this is through unlawful unilateral sanctions, which have been for many years used in violation of the Charter and used as a tool of political blackmail.
I mean, again, I can't really disagree with him. And I know there are a lot of, well-meaning people that are just like, well, if China takes Taiwan, look, I don't like conflict with death. I don't like authoritarian governments. I don't like a lot of what Russia's done. I certainly don't like the Chinese model of society, right? But to say that they're black and white issues, with us or against us issues, no. And to say that you and I, or people at our socioeconomic levels or below in other countries, are in any way, shape, or form going to benefit from that type of warfare, show me the money. Where has that happened? Seriously.
The cynicism here is obvious because these restrictions hit civilians. They prevent them from getting access to basic goods, including medication, vaccines, and food. An egregious example we have here is the American blockade of Cuba, more than 60 years old. The General Assembly has been for a long time and insistently demanding that be immediately lifted, and this is being done by the absolute majority of voices. The Secretary General, whose duty include helping implement General Assembly decisions, must, of course, pay special attention to this issue. The Secretary General has a special role also in mobilizing efforts to overcome food and energy crises, which resulted in the wake of an out-of-control money emission in the United States and the European Union during the pandemic, and as a result of irresponsible, unprofessional acts by the European Union in the hydrocarbon fuel markets.
I mean, again, saying it without saying it. This whole thing has been contrived. All these food shortages and energy shortages. Oh, they were the follies of the EU and the U.S. establishment. Just by mistake. Oh, well, whoopsie-doo. Whoopsie, we didn't know what to do.
Despite common sense, Washington and Brussels compounded the situation when they announced economic war against Russia. As a result, there is a growing price on foodstuffs, fertilizers, oil and gas. We welcome the efforts made by the Secretary General when they helped arrive at the Istanbul agreements on the 24th of June, but they need to be implemented. But so far, the ships with the Ukrainian grain go somewhere, but not into the poorest countries, on the one hand. On the other hand, the impediments by US and EU, the financial and logistical impediments against our grain and fertilizers have not been lifted. Furthermore, for several weeks, we have been saying that about 300,000 tons of fertilizer are being held up in European ports, and we have been proposing that they be forwarded free of charge to the needy countries in Africa.
Oh, have you? But I thought all these people were worried about saving lives and feeding people. Right? Isn't that what the UN's all about? It's not about, managing every man, woman, and child over an authoritarian system of they call it a technocracy, but it's a technopoly. Okay? I mean, we're living in it right now. And I'm not saying that Russia's fighting the New World Order. But Russia certainly has its own interests and is doing a great job right now of pointing out all the Johnny nonsense that's right in our face. And they're not done.
But the European Union is not heeding this. The official Russophobia in the West is unprecedented now. The scope is grotesque. They're not shying away from declaring the intent to inflict the military defeat on our country, but also to destroy and fracture Russia. In other words, what they want to do is to remove from the global map a geopolitical entity which has become all too independent. So how have Russia in the recent decades been infringing on the interests of our opponents? Is it that we cannot be forgiven for making possible the military and strategic détente in the 1980s and 1990s because of my country's position? Or is it that we voluntarily dissolved the Warsaw Treaty Organization and thus removed the reason for NATO's being? Is it that we supported the reunification of Germany without any preconditions and against the position of London and Paris? That we withdrew our military from Europe, Asia, from Latin America? That we recognized the independence of former Soviet republics? That we believed the promises of Western leaders not to expand, not by an inch of NATO in the East, but when it started, agreed to basically legitimize it through signing a founding act between Russia and NATO.
So again, you're listening to him. He's like, we've played the game for a very long time. And where has it gotten us? You said we weren't going to move NATO by 1 inch. Well then.
Did we infringe on the interests of the West when we warned them that it was unacceptable to bring closer a threatening military infrastructure, bring it closer to our borders? The arrogance of the West, the American exclusivity, have become particularly destructive after the end of the Cold War. Already in 1991, the Deputy Chief of Pentagon, Paul Wolfowitz, in his conversation with the NATO Commander Europe, Wesley Clark, stated openly that, I quote, after the end of the Cold War, we can use our military without any fear of reprisal. We have 5, maybe 10 years so as to clean out the surrogate Soviet regimes, such as Iraq and Syria, until such time as there is a new superpower who can challenge us.
I mean, he's spot on all this stuff. Paul Wolfowitz was one of the driving forces in the W. Bush administration that doesn't get enough of play. Okay, a lot of people want to talk Darth Cheney. They got to understand that Wolfowitz was big in the background. Chertoff was big in the background. Rumsfeld was big in the background. All of them players with Kissinger. All right, big in the background. Big time. Brzezinski, those guys in the back doors. But Wolfowitz was a real player in the administration, and just like he said, let's destabilize Russia further by taking out their Middle Eastern allies. And he just mentioned Syria there. People have forgotten about Syria. They don't even know what's going on in Yemen. That's where literally our media has been at now for almost a decade. Forget about fake news era, or if you're new to this game, just the Trump stuff. I mean, the propaganda against Syria back in the day and Assad gassing his own people was wild. Wild. And relatively unchallenged.
End of quote. And I am convinced that at some point in someone's memoirs, we will find out how the American strategy was being developed as regards Ukraine. But even so, Washington's plans in this regard are obvious in any event. It is possible they are not being forgiven at the request of the United States and the European Union. We supported the agreement of the Ukrainian president at the time, Mr. Yanukovych, his agreement with the forces of opposition to resolve crisis in February 2014. These agreements were guaranteed by Germany, Poland, and France, but the next morning they were trampled underfoot by the leaders of the bloody coup, who thus humiliated the European mediators. The West simply shrugged and watched in silence how members of the coup started bombing the eastern of Ukraine, where people refused to accept the results of the coup, watched as organizers made into the rank of national heroes the accomplices of Nazis. Were we expected to acquiesce in the Kiev intent to ban the Russian language, education, our mass media and culture, with the insistence on chasing the Russians out of Crimea, on waging war against Donbass, whose citizens were proclaimed by the then authorities and now authorities in Kiev, proclaimed to be not people but specimens? Is it that we violated the interests of the West because we played a role in stopping the forceful actions by the Kiev neo-Nazis in the east of Ukraine, and then demanded that the Minsk package of measures be implemented?
I just want to stop it here, and I want to make sure everybody knows, because this is on YouTube, that that's the representative of the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Russia. All right, he's saying that. We're not necessarily agreeing with that. I don't want it to be against terms and service, but I'd sure love to see somebody actually debunk it. You're not supposed to use that word unless you're talking about people at home who like their Bible and their flag, and they got to make America great. Bumper sticker and matching hat. Not allowed to talk about them unless that's the way you're talking about them. Just saying. Can't have any reality sauce. Apparently. Allegedly.
Something that was unanimously approved by the Security Council, but then laid low by Kiev with the participation of US and EU. For many years, we have been proposing to have security in Europe with the basis on equal and indivisible security enshrined at the highest level in OSCE documents. According to this principle, no one is to strengthen their own security at the expense of others. And the very last proposal to make these agreements legally binding, something that we introduced in December 2021, and the reaction was an arrogant rejection of that. The incapacity of Western countries to negotiate and the continued war by the Kiev regime against their own people left us with no choice but to recognize the independence of the Donetsk and the Lugansk People's Republics and start a special military operation to protect the Russian and other people on Donbass, and so as to remove the threats against our security, which NATO had been consistently creating in Ukraine at our borders. The operation is conducted in pursuance of agreements on friendship, cooperation, mutual assistance between us and that republic, and on the basis of Article 51 of the UN Charter. I'm convinced that any sovereign, self-respecting state would do the same in our stead, a state which understands its responsibility to his own people.
I mean, let's reverse it. Seriously. Let's reverse it. Let's say this happened on our border, whether it be the Mexican or Canadian border, and it was the Russians doing this. I mean, is he wrong? Would we even let it get to that point, is what I'm trying to say. And at the same time, what kind of backdoor deals do we really have when it comes to military intervention, space warfare, nuclear warfare, etc., when you have joint missions going to the ISS out of Kazakhstan? What deals have we cut behind closed doors? What treaties have truly been signed? Right? Isn't that a valid question? Isn't that something we should know about? But again, apparently we don't get a say. We're the peasant class.
The West is now throwing a fit because of the referenda which are being conducted in the Lugansk, Donetsk, Kharkov, and Zaporozhye oblasts. But people living there are basically only reacting to what was said to them by the head of the Kiev regime, Mr. Zelensky, in August 2021. At the time, he said anyone who feels themselves to be Russian for the benefit of their children and grandchildren to get out and to go to Russia. And that's what the inhabitants of those regions are doing, taking their land with them where their ancestors had been living for hundreds of years. Any unbiased observer can see very clearly the Anglo-Saxons who fully subjugated Europe, for them Ukraine is just an expandable material as they are fighting against Russia. NATO declared that our country is an immediate threat on their way to total domination, and a long-term threat will be the PRC. At the same time, collective West, headed by Washington, is sending frightening signals to other countries, saying anyone who disobeys can be next. One of the consequences of the crusade by the West against the objectionables is the growing decline of multilateral institutions. They have been turned by the United States and allies into tools to implement their own selfish interests. This is something that is being pursued at the UN, Human Rights Council, UNESCO, and other multilateral institutions. The organizational prohibition of chemical weapons has basically been privatized. Fierce attempts are being made to prevent creating within the Convention on Biological and Toxin Weapons of a mechanism which would ensure transparency for hundreds military biological programs of the Pentagon has around the world.
Now, it's pretty odd here, but he talks about the biological programs, and he basically, these things are much more out in the open and cavalier. I was listening to, I think it was Immortality Inc. over at C-SPAN, and of course Calico representatives are there, and those for some reason are a little bit more out in the open. It's curious.
Including on the perimeter of our country and throughout Eurasia. And these programs are far from harmless. This is irrefutable, according to the facts that we came to in Ukraine. There is an assertive line to privatize the UN Secretariat, introducing into its work a neoliberal narrative which ignores the cultural and civilizational multifaceted nature of the world. We call upon making sure that we follow the Charter and ensure a fair geographical representation of member states, making sure that there is no one single country dominant in the Secretariat. An impossible situation was created by Washington, having to do with the obligation of the host country of a headquarters agreement to ensure normal conditions for the participation of all member states in UN work. The obligations under this host country agreement are also placed on the Secretary General, and inactivity is unacceptable. We're also concerned by the efforts made by countries who are undermining the prerogatives of the Security Council. And of course, the Council and the UN have to be aligned to contemporary realities. We see the prospect of making the Security Council more democratic exclusively through broadening the representation of the countries from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We note India and Brazil in particular as key international actors and worthy candidates for permanent membership within the Council, whilst at the same time unilaterally and mandatorily raising the profile of Africa. It is very important today to make sure that all member states unequivocally, without reservations, reaffirm their commitment to the purposes and principles of the Charter as a first and necessary step to restore collective responsibility for the fate of humankind. And that was the reason why in July 2021, a group of friends to support the Charter was created. And co-sponsor of the group was Russia, and it now counts 20 countries. The goal here is to make sure that there is strict abiding with universal norms of international law to counterbalance unilateral approaches, and we call upon everyone to join in. And in this context, great potential is possessed by such organizations as the Non-Aligned Movement, BRICS, SCO, and ASEAN.
And let me just say this. I'm no fan of the UN. I want the UN out of the United States and the U.S. out of the UN. I don't want to empower it. But again, I see how Russia feels and is trying to empower themselves in this organization that they feel has essentially turned against him, and they have. I mean, with the NATO forces, they realize that, obviously the United Nations is not being an ally geopolitically.
The Western colleagues are very aggressive in imposing their understanding of democracy as a way of organizing life to all countries, categorically do not want to be guided by democratic norms in international affairs. And a very good example, the situation in Ukraine. Again, it would seem to be that Russia justified its position, has been justifying it for years, and with the West said they disagree. Okay, well, let other members of the international community decide for themselves what their position would be, on the side of one, on the side of others, or neutral. That's what happens in democracies when politicians opposing each other defend their viewpoints and try to convey it to others. But the United States and allies do not give the freedom of choice to anyone. They threaten to twist the arms of anyone who dares think for themselves, and demand by threats that countries join in with anti-Russian sanctions. That doesn't work very well, but it is very clear that these acts by United States and its satellites is not democracy. It's pure, unadulterated dictatorship.
It is pure. Again, I got to agree with them there. It's exactly what it is. They certainly didn't give a poll of the American people to say, hey, do you want to support this thing in Ukraine? No. It was all the puppets in the Congress and the Senate and city councils that were turning bridges blue and yellow. We didn't get a vote. Most of us were like, whoa, easy, guy. Whoa, we don't want another war or conflict. This one seems dangerous. It's against a nuclear power. Whoa! That is a dictatorship. He's right, 100%. And not only that, as it took off, what happened? RT, out of here, gone. We're just censoring more and more and more on as many subjects as we, the people, what they believe to be, again, the peasant, the serf class, will allow. And we're getting rolled over. We're getting rolled over, period.
Attempt to impose it. We're left with a strong impression that the Washington and subjugated Europe are trying to keep their disappearing hegemony using prohibited means. Diplomacy constantly is being replaced by illegal sanctions against competitors in economics, sports, information area, culture, and generally in contacts with people. Let's turn to the problem with visas for delegates for international meetings in New York, Geneva, Vienna, and Paris.
By the way, he barely got into the United States. They waited till last minute to approve him into the U.S. to speak here.
There also, we see the desire to remove competition, make sure that alternative viewpoints do not come into multilateral discussions. I am convinced that we need to protect the UN and scrape everything that confrontational and superficial from there and give it back its reputation and an honest platform to siege for balance for all member states. And this is the approach that we're guided up when we put forward our national initiatives. It is of principal importance to make sure that we have a comprehensive ban on the deployment of weapons in space, and this is the reason for the Russia-China draft international treaty considered by the Conference on Disarmament.
Let me just stop right there. You notice how they got slipped in? All right? That's why we focus on this stuff. He's telling you right there about space warfare, and who are the players? The United States and China. All right? Space warfare is real. It is legit. And at the same time, anything that would be carried out against the public would probably have plausible deniability all over the place. Talk about stealth. These are the real directed energy weapon scenarios. All right? Star Wars Program 83. So again, we've got some backdoor cut deals, but he's hinting at it right here.
It's particularly important to protect our cyberspace within the open-ended working group of the General Assembly on the agreements on how to protect international security and to use a special committee for Universal Convention on how to counter the use of ICT for criminal purposes. We continue supporting Office on Counterterrorism and other anti-terrorist entities within the UN, and we go to continue develop relationships between the UN, CSTO, Eurasian Economic Union, CIS, so as to pool our efforts in the greater Eurasia. We call for an enhanced work on overcoming regional conflicts. We think that the priority here is to overcome the impasse in creating an independent Palestinian state, restoring the state of Iraq and Libya destroyed by NATO aggression, neutralize the threats to Syria, having a sustainable process of national conciliation in Yemen, overcoming the heavy burden of NATO presence in Afghanistan.
Let me just stop it right there. This is why we played almost the entire thing. Okay, and we're going to play. He actually gets quite a round of applause for that. I don't disagree with anything he just said there, Middle Eastern policy style. Not a thing. They're all reasonable. Again, they have the AI automated guns in Palestine. You understand? It's like the biggest apartheid situation out there. They got a slave trade in Libya. Why? Because we were bringing democracy everywhere? Get the mother truck out of here. And again, that doesn't mean I'm team Putin, team bareback riding a horse, wrestling a bear. No. But everything he said here was basic common sense. Basic common sense.
And we are working on restoring the original JCPOA on Iran nuclear program, ensuring the comprehensive settlement on the Korean Peninsula. Many conflict situations in Africa require that we reject the temptation to play a zero-sum game there and that outside players consolidate around the initiatives by the African Union. We are concerned by the situation in Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, where the United States and the EU are stubbornly leading to the destruction of the international legal basis as we currently have it in Resolution 1244 and the Dayton Peaceful Agreement. Madam President, at times like these, it's natural to seek wisdom from our predecessors. So, in the pithy expression of the former Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, who remembered the horrors of World War, he said, and I quote, "The UN wasn't created to take mankind to paradise, but rather to save humanity from hell." These are very topical words. They call upon us to understand our individual and collective responsibility for creating conditions for a peaceful and harmonious development for our future generations, and everyone need to show political will for that. When we are ready for such honest work, and we are convinced that the stability of the world order can be ensured exclusively through returning to the origins of the UN diplomacy, basing ourselves on the key principle of true democracy, the respect for the sovereign equality of states. I thank you.
Again, tough for me to say that I disagree with any of that. Folks, it's time to thumbs it up, subscribe, and share if you're new to the broadcast. Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, Shade the Motion Picture. They're all free. I want you to share them. They're my documentary films. I feel like they're powerful. Red Voice Media. redvoicemedia.net/Jason. And we're bringing it. Get ready for it. I'm super pumped. We're going to be 4 days a week, 4 hours premium. Okay, it's coming in the next few weeks. They gave away my premium this week. That's the cool thing. They're giving away most of it. You want to directly support me, the links are down below, including that one. But you can buy me a coffee, $5, $10, $15. It means the world to me. It's how we're doing it. Join us over on Rumble. And remember, Rockfin is out there. It's like a Netflix for creators. You hit subscribe on a desktop, $9.99 a month or $99.99 for the year. In fact, that reminds me, Wesley Summer, thank you for tipping over at Rockfin. Is there a link to this meeting? Thank you for bringing both sides for people to see. Congrats for the deal with RVM. You've worked hard for it. Thank you so much. You can go to C-SPAN. C-SPAN has the entire thing. And on top of that, I believe YouTube is carrying a bunch of the entire UN presentation of all these different global leaders. So there it is, guys. This is how we're doing it. You know the deal. It's not about left or right. It's always about right and wrong. We're not riding Poot style or Russia style, but we are riding peace style. Because remember how many people over there are getting caught up in this that don't want to be at war. They don't want to be cutting other people's throats. They don't want to be shooting at other people. They don't want Elon Musk's Starlink system matching up with one of the Ghost or Sidewinder drones and blowing them up. They don't want that. And I want that. So thank you so much for joining me. Go check me out on all the others, Rumble, Rockfin. We're going to be doing big things over here, redvoicemedia.net/Jason. I love you guys, and I will see you all on the flip side.